Good evening and welcome to Wednesday evening, January 30th. Your delivery of Steel Truth is coming at you right now. Tonight's show is going to be a barn burner, I can assure you of that. My guest, Michael McKibben, who says that he is the author and the founder and the patent holder for the technology that's behind all social media being used today. He also claims that the government stole it from him. That's right. The government. So those rumors that you've heard for years now that perhaps Facebook is nothing more than a CIA psyop, well, folks, maybe tonight you're going to learn that that just may be the case. So stick with me. We'll be right back with Michael McKibben, and we'll jump right into this very, very important discussion. Welcome back to Steel Truth. I'm Ann Vandersteel, and this evening I'm joined with Michael McKibben, who is the CEO of Leader Technologies. He's out of Columbus, Ohio. And folks, I got to tell you, when you listen to this story, if you haven't heard of this young man, you're going to walk away probably reconsidering whether you want to even log on to Facebook, Twitter, or any sort of social media ever again, because as we've heard the rumor out there, an innuendo that this is nothing but a big psyop by the CIA to get more information, this gentleman is going to absolutely cross the T and dot the I to just about anything you've ever heard, and he's going to bring clarity to exactly what we have succumbed to unwittingly for those of us that use these platforms to not only share family photo albums, but to actually do business and share ideas and have movements not too dissimilar to what the president has used Twitter for. Michael, welcome to Steel Truth. It is a real pleasure and an honor to have you here. You have been through a lot, and I look forward to sharing it with the audience.
Well, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's certainly a pleasure. So let's take it from the top, because this story goes back over a decade, where your son was attending Harvard at the same time Mark Zuckerberg, the gentleman who purportedly founded Facebook, was attending Harvard. And there's an allegation that Mark Zuckerberg got access to a white paper dealing with certain technological advances that you and your company, which had developed, had emailed your son. And you believe Zuckerberg had hacked into your servers while at Harvard and had gotten a copy of that white paper. What was on that white paper that you claim he got access to?
Well, that story is all we knew at one point in this saga, because we filed for a patent infringement case against Facebook in 2008, not really knowing the larger story. And at that time, we could see Facebook was infringing our patents, and so we found a law firm willing to take it all the way, and we, in fact, took this all the way to the Supreme Court. And part of the discovery in that case was to look at Zuckerberg's activities back in 2003, 2004, because obviously he was the CEO of Facebook. At the time, my son was probably 200 yards away from him in another dorm at Harvard. And we know from the story that came out that Zuckerberg hacked the house sites at Harvard and got everyone's photos. Well, my son had a white paper from me, which we had published after we had filed patents, which described in detail, not in detail, but the general features of our invention. And in fact, that's when Facebook went live within months. And my son called me and said, "Well, Dad, this sounds just like what you told me about several months ago." And I looked at it and I said, "Yeah, it does. But hindsight is 20/20. We now know what was going on, and it involved the U.S. government, and Zuckerberg was just a cutout. So he was just one of many cutouts that got access to our technology and then weaponized it for not only the commercial applications, but also to make it a worldwide mass surveillance program for the intelligence community."
So let's define, for those in the audience that don't understand the intelligence community vernacular phrase, cutout. Cutout essentially is somebody who is really a poster child who's going to represent what we think is actually happening when in fact something else more devious, or maybe not, is happening behind the scenes. And what you're saying here is Mark Zuckerberg really was not the inventor of Facebook. The federal government, CIA, NSA were trying to develop technology to be able to surveil Americans. I've had Bill Binney on, former NSA whistleblower, who was the instrumental in architecting Thin Thread to surveil and retrieve information, but for a very specific purpose, right? To project and look into what they might be able to predict would be terrorist activities or anybody that would want to harm the U.S., when in fact what we are now learning is that same technology was weaponized to spy on us. And what the government was struggling with at that time was scalability of access to everybody's information and how they accrued it. And you have figured out with your patent, if I, and correct me if I'm not getting this accurately, how to actually scale that surveillance ability. Is that correct?
Well, we weren't obviously working on it for surveillance,
right.
But we, let me take the story back a little bit. You got it pretty close, by the way.
Oh, good.
Back in the mid-'90s, I had rebuilt AT&T's email system right as Windows 95 was coming on board. And at the time, the popular collaboration technology that was out there was called groupware. And most people are familiar probably with Lotus Notes, if they've been around a few years. Lotus Notes or Microsoft Exchange or Novell GroupWise. The general thinking in the technology community back then was that one of those platforms would be the scaled environment they would use for the internet.
Right.
And when the internet back in 95, 96 only had about 10 million commercial users, it could probably handle that. But what we saw and what I saw from working with my client, AT&T, is that it wouldn't scale. And, or I didn't think it would scale and that something else was going to be required. So in 97, I formed Leader Technologies and hired a very talented group of people that I would have put up against anybody that was developing for Microsoft or AT&T or anybody else. And we literally didn't talk to anybody, made everybody sign non-disclosure agreements, and we went into silent mode until we figured out what was wrong with collaboration on a large scale, and especially as the internet was starting to hit. Well, to cut a very long story short, that took about 2.5, 3 years. And then in Christmas of 1999, we had the great aha moment. And that moment was we realized that groupware, which everyone was counting on to be the go-to platform for collaboration, would not and could not scale. We figured that out in our research. And so we then realized that we had a tiger by the tail. And through a series of introductions, I was introduced to Professor Jim Chandler in Washington, who we thought and were told was the go-to guy for patents and intellectual property and trade secrets. At that time, he was advising the White House, which would have been Clinton back then.
Right.
He was advising the Justice Department, Congress, most large companies, academia, you name it, he was advising them. So on paper, we thought we had the right guy to protect our intellectual property. What he did not tell us, and we did not know, and now in 2019, we know, but probably didn't figure this out until about 2 or 3 years ago, is that he was the chief advisor to a whole series of intelligence activities going on involving the Clinton White House, then became the Bush White House and the Obama White House, to enable the intelligence community to seize control of the internet and to embed a universal backdoor key so that basically the CIA and the NSA could have access to all of our data at all time, which they obviously do now without even a warrant. So we learned that that's what he was involved in, and he would have known the problem they were having with the IBM and Microsoft technology at the time.
Right.
And so when I went to Washington and met him about 2 blocks from the White House, he heard about this technology and he immediately agreed to be on our board. And which I was flattered by. I was an entrepreneur.
And it's so convenient.
He agreed to be on our board. He agreed to be our attorney and to help at that time, protect our trade secrets, but then additionally help file patents. So as you can imagine, with somebody with that level of access to the intelligence world, we were hosed from the very moment we met him.
You absolutely were. And, if you look at the timeline, this is back in 1999. And in 2001, we had that horrific day, 9/11. It's very suspect that all of a sudden they're jamming the Patriot Act down our throats. We need to be able to look into everything. And of course, at that point, Americans were happy. Those that, of course, had nothing to hide, which was the majority of Americans, mind you, we were happy to give up our rights to privacy because we wanted the bad guys caught. We never wanted to have that happen again. We were all in a state of shock and PTSD and whatever you call it. We were devastated. So really, they were already accessing our information. Then they created a Patriot Act to retroactively look back on our information that they already had. They were covering their tracks again, not unlike what we're witnessing with FISA today. I mean, it's the same.
I've heard Bill Binney speak, and he talks about the mid 2001 being when he, in fact, has said they went rogue. And what we now see going back is that was exactly the same time that they decided to go with our platform technology, where they were basically going to save everything in large-scale data warehouses, whereas Bill's system actually followed the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and focused on targets of opportunity, which is what they had done traditionally. So it appears that that transition, when they went from deciding to stop using his system at the NSA to using our platform for social networking, where the assumption was we're going to just store everything and then we'll search it later, which is what they do now.
Okay.
Now, we didn't know all this then, and still until a few years ago, we did not know this. We can see it and know it now. And so, for instance, when Snowden came out with those slides, those NSA slides showing all the customers that the NSA / probably CIA was supporting, we realized these were all the people that were paying us lip service that we had the next best thing since sliced bread.
Right.
But they were already collaborating with under the covers.
So your technology is the backbone for surveillance, scalability for YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, you name the social media platform, you see your patent being applied everywhere. This is clearly obviously a clear violation of our Fourth Amendment rights. We didn't sign up for this at all. You didn't sign up to do this. You unwittingly have deployed something by the development of it and had it stolen from the federal government. Let's talk about where you are right now, and we'll go back to some more details. But there's, the president has got something sitting on his desk right now. Why don't you detail that out to the audience, what it is and what you're asking for?
Right. So we took our case to the Supreme Court. When at the district court level, we noticed that Facebook had some sort of darling relationship with the district courts. Then we went and appealed it to the Federal Circuit in Washington, which is a special court that hears all patent appeals. And it's in Washington. It's in Lafayette Square. You see the White House when you look out the front door. Those courts also circled the wagons around Facebook, and then we took it to the Supreme Court. FYI, one of the first things we discovered and knew something was horribly wrong was that all of these judges had mountains of Facebook interests, financial interests. At the time, we proved it during the case, and yet they totally ignored it when it came before them because they obviously knew it. And so what we can see now, the Facebook IPO in 2012 was a feeding frenzy for all of these deep state players who were going to make fortunes. Do you hear that noise?
I did. It comes and goes. It's the magic of new media.
Okay, never mind. So anyway, we discovered that a lot of these influential people that we put our trust in all had these massive Facebook financial interests. We took our case to the Supreme Court with a writ, and Justice Roberts, he didn't disclose that he had mountains of these same interests. and in fact had earlier, the previous several years earlier, had recused himself in a Microsoft case because he had Microsoft stock. Well, Microsoft was one of the largest holders of financial interest in Facebook and made out like a bandit. And they weren't even one of the big players in the Facebook IPO. So we then began, we said, okay, we can walk away, we can put our tail between our legs, and we can just fade into the woodwork, which I'm sure they hoped we would. But I'm a civil engineer. I like to solve problems. I like to know why things happen. And so I said, well, let's just start digging and figure out what this is. So we started peeling away this onion. And now we come to the current time. Once we figured out who did it, what they did, when they did it, how they did it, why they did it, we know this now. And this has a long historical tale to it, by the way. And we sat down with some of our shareholders and we said, what do we do? And one of them's a very, very experienced engineer in the steel business. And he said, well, when people don't pay me, I put a lien on them. And we started looking into that. And sure enough, the government passed an act called the Miller Act,
right,
which enables people to file for payment for services the government has received the benefit of, but has not paid somebody. And so the Miller Act has two tiers. So not only could our company make the claim, but all of our shareholders can make the claim because they were providers of financing to our inventions.
Would this entail the government having to acknowledge that they stole your patent?
Of course.
And as of yet, have they made that acknowledgement?
The government gave us a patent on this. They've already acknowledged it. This is a crazy thing.
Right.
So we don't need to prove that they have the benefit of it. They gave us a patent on it. Now, in all this corruption, I'm not sure why they did, but they did. In 2006, we got our first patent. In 2012, the second, and 13, the third. We have 3 patents on this technology. So apps, the basic platform for social networking, and all apps that run on it are patents that we hold.
And why are you not able to put liens on companies that are building apps on this technology now then? If you have the actual patent on this, why is it just the government that you're leveling the Miller Act on to get them to back pay you vis-a-vis the CIA, NSA using your technology to spy? And if the CIA, if Eric Schmidt from Google, if Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook are really CIA assets, why is it that you're not also going after the private companies in addition to the government, because everybody's using this technology? Why is this only sitting on the president's desk?
Because the government was the chief distributor of the invention and therefore is liable for the damage they've caused.
So how much is this lien that you're put on the president's desk right now for the government?
Well, that's a good one. That's a good question. If you look at the market value of social networking and related technologies, the value is enormous. It's probably $5 to $6 trillion.
Wow.
Now, we have suggested an approach to the president whereby we would break this into 2 pieces, and we would get a lump sum payment for the last 18 years of value, and then we would get an ongoing license on an annual basis going forward. So we've put those to them, and it's a big number. I mean, it's into the trillions when you add it all up.
That would make you the wealthiest man in the world.
Well, when I started out here, that was my plan. It didn't work out that way so far.
Wow, extraordinary. So let's talk a little bit about, so just to recap, essentially the government has stolen your intellectual property. It was deployed by, through the use of Facebook. You contend that Facebook...
Actually, if I can elaborate on that.
Please.
It wasn't deployed through Facebook. It was deployed through a foundation that our patent attorney started with IBM called the IBM Eclipse Foundation.
Okay.
On November 29th of 2001. And what they did is they pretended that all of our technology was open source. And I'm going to put that in parentheses or in quotes. They pretended it was open source. IBM issued the code back to all of the members of this foundation with their copyright listed at the top, which is obviously illegal. They did it anyway. And then they distributed it to everybody that wanted to have it, which was, in fact, the whole of Silicon Valley. Everybody got the code at the same time. And so we can track this now because they published all of their meeting minutes. They published all of their memberships. And it's a one-to-one correlation with everything we know now as the deep state.
Incredible.
So the whole of the IT world related to social networking technology, in our view, is a PSYOP that was intended to enrich those that were in on this deal, as i.e. crony capitalism or fascist capitalism, and then to become a mass surveillance tool whereby those that have the power to access this data, which has now been achieved essentially, could stay one step ahead of anybody that they considered a target or an enemy.
So let's talk about the culture of corruption around surveillance. You contend this goes back a long time ago. Why don't you bring people through the history lesson? Because I heard it from you and I thought it was fascinating.
Wow, you really want to go there?
I do. I want to go there. I think the audience needs to hear this, to be honest. It's really fascinating.
This
and it's factual.
This information is just coming out from new research. There are researchers all over the planet working on this now. And it's essentially tied to the invention of wireless technology, the transmission of voice wirelessly.
Which predates, by the way, because people, generations today think of a cell phone as wireless technology. We're going back, telegraph, being able to do.
We're going back into the late 1800s.
Correct.
And the real nexus point here is the British War Cabinet of 1917 at the time of World War I. And what we now see is there was a very intention to tie wireless technology to propaganda, the British War Propaganda Bureau, and psychiatry through agencies, including the one most people are familiar with, the Tavistock Institute. But before that, it was called the Wellington House. And so what we see today is started then, and the people who surrounded those developments were all quite involved in the British Privy Council and British Parliament. And now what has happened is we've been able to track now the tracks through the decades. Now we're only talking 100 years ago right now. So we're not talking about ancient history. So what we're seeing today is the end result of a plan set in place about 100 years ago to have an elite group of people control the organization of the planet using wireless technology and propaganda.
It sounds, and not to interrupt you, pardon me, Michael, but it sounds eerily familiar about the people today at the top of the food chain, the globalists, if you will, that want to control the narrative using wireless technology known as your television set. It's the same thing. We're just controlling the narrative vis-a-vis any type of device that can connect to information. And it's the same playbook, just being recycled over and over, is it not?
It is. That's the uncanny part of it. Nothing technologically has changed from that basic playbook that you talked about, except that technology has gotten faster. And what we now see is when the internet came along, there was an intent to do the same thing through wireless with the use of the internet. And they got stuck around 1999 when IBM and Microsoft couldn't scale.
Right.
And that's what we licked, is the ability to have tens of millions of people looking at the same thing without the whole system crashing because there's so much volume.
Right. It's extraordinary, the fact that this is the same age-old problem or a problem that a solution was really just, born out of necessity, right? Necessity is the mother of all invention, but it was stolen. And it's been used over and over again to violate our Fourth Amendment and to gain control of the narrative, unlike what they were trying, or very much like what they tried to do in the early 1900s, gain control of the narrative so the British Empire could maintain its control. And we're still deploying it today.
If I could interrupt you.
Sure.
Some of our researchers have just put together a sequence of companies and names that started with the 1917 War Cabinet. And probably anybody that reads history knows about Marconi.
Correct.
Well, there was another gentleman by the name of Tesla who predated Marconi in the development of the wireless, but the British government decided to give a monopoly to Marconi and ignore Tesla. And yet in 1948, the U.S. government, the Supreme Court, invalidated Marconi's claim and said Tesla was the inventor of wireless. That's just an FYI. But we have Marconi, we have Tavistock Institute, we have RCA, Radio Corporation of America, was formed 10 years after the deal with Marconi by the British government. RCA was involved with General Electric in Europe.
Right.
And RCA also founded NBC.
Right.
Okay. And then
which General Electric owns today.
Which GE owns today, and this is a really small swirl of people. And then you've got a company that developed in England called Serco. And Serco is the biggest company in the U.S. nobody's ever heard of. They control the air traffic controllers in 58 of our cities. And Serco, its former name was RCA in Britain. So you've got RCA, then you've got Serco now coming to this country and being granted contracts by our government, the Senior Executive Service. Right now, Serco's had over 5,000 contracts issued to them, technology contracts. Let me just tell you a few contracts they have. They have the management contract for FEMA Region 4. They control the Obamacare website. They provide the Office of Personnel Management's website, the GSA's website. What else? The one that really gripes me is they since 2006 have examined all of the patents that patent inventors submit to the U.S. Patent Office. They run our U.S. Patent Office and have done since 2006.
Incredible.
A British company. Well, we now track the gentleman, the British knight, Sir Geoffrey Patty, who has been involved in all this. And in the 1990 to 1999, he was the chairman of Marconi. And then Marconi merged with British Aerospace, and British Aerospace is tied to Lockheed and Boeing. So there we see a continuity. Oh, I need to mention that who worked at NBC? That was Jeff Zucker. Where's
right.
Jeff? He's at CNN.
Correct.
So now we see CNN tied directly back to the Marconi monopoly in the British government.
It's always the same circle of people. I say this over and over again because every single scandal or group of deviant, malfeasant people that get together always seem to be that same swirl, that same group of just bad people with bad intention.
What we've discovered is it's a dynasty mentality.
It is a dynasty mentality.
A small group of people. We're now in about the third generation of the current dynasty.
Yeah.
But we can also take this dynasty a lot farther back, but I'm not going to go there yet.
Well, I want to talk briefly about, speaking of dynasty, the Clintons. There's a tool out there called transcription keys. Hillary Clinton has control of the keys, and these, for lack of a better description, your keys are your computers. When you connect computer to computer out on the internet, they exchange keys so the computers can connect from one machine to another. What does it mean that Hillary Clinton controls the transcription keys. What exactly does that mean in terms of our privacy, in terms of her ability to shut us down?
Okay, I think you mean encryption keys.
I'm sorry, encryption keys. Pardon me.
Right. Well, encryption keys is a form of scrambling a signal so that while it's passing over the air, nobody can grab it. Theoretically, nobody can grab it and read it. It's just a bunch of junk. Transcription or encryption has been used for millennia.
Right.
In the old days, they used to just scramble words and send those out and then have some key on it that tells you how to unscramble it.
Right.
Well, technology just allows you to do that with more numbers, make it more scrambled, but there's always a way to unscramble the keys. And so there basically is a protocol that has been developed throughout the world for how this encryption is going to occur. It's actually more than one. But in 1993, the new Clinton administration in June of 1993 held a conference sponsored by the Carnegie Institute of Endowment for Peace, and whose first speaker was John Podesta, and whose organizer was my former patent attorney before I knew him. And the subject of the conference was giving the FBI backdoor key, encryption key, into all data communication and all file encryption. So
and nobody sees a problem with this. Nobody. I mean, the title of the conference is that, the discussion, the topic is that, and people seem to be okay with this.
You need to ask me how we found out about this.
Well, I'd like to. That was my next question. How did you find out about this?
It was disclosed in a Judicial Watch FOIA request of Hillary's email server.
God bless Tom Fenton.
Yes.
He's an extraordinary man. He has, talk about someone who's been David versus Goliath. He has just pounded the pavement with those FOIA requests. I don't even know how many he's up into and counting. I need to ask him that sometime, how many he has FOIA'd and gotten his request fulfilled.
We're a fan.
Huge.
He has found numerous proofs of some of the things that we're talking about now, but that was a significant one. And the other thing about the Carnegie Endowment for Peace was the Carnegie Endowment was funding many of the operations of this Marconi, Tavistock Institute, propaganda, mind control, psychology and psychiatry since the First World War and before. So it's the same institute. So they funded this operation they were focused on something called the Clipper chip back in '93.
Right.
They wanted to embed this technology capability. Congress balked on it, and so they didn't get anywhere with it. So what they did is they just changed their approach to make it a requirement for exporting software. So when they did that, they forced everybody to put this backdoor key into all hardware, software, and firmware. Now, so the Clintons knew that way back then. And so what many researchers have now proven is that she, through her former law partner at Rose Law Firm, is now the chief controller of many of the companies that provide and keep our encryption keys for when we log on the internet now. So with those keys, you have access to everything. And we've now seen that Robert Mueller is getting in on that act too.
Well, yeah, there's no surprises there. I want to back up for a second, the Clipper chip, because this is something that should not be just glossed over. This is really, really significant. Every computer, hardware, software, firmware that you buy that is manufactured outside the country has this backdoor in it, which means the government has access to everything you put on there or send across the internet. And now Hillary Clinton and Rose Law Firm have access to the encryption keys that allow them to connect and take anything they want or view anything they want on your electronic devices.
They include controlling the company that holds all the backdoor keys for the FBI itself.
Okay, so just think about that for a second. The FBI, our own intelligence agencies, have to go to a private entity to get access to encryption keys. In other words, the government is beholden to a private entity for this, not the other way around. I'm not even sure which is worse at this point, frankly, now that we know about our government.
That's called a public-private partnership.
Sure, correct. But at some point, where's the accountability seems to be lost somewhere. And now that we know what we know about what's been going on between the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, thanks to people like yourself and Bill Benny and Kurt Wiebe and Kevin Shipp and others who've come forward and whistleblown about this stuff, it seems to me we have foxes everywhere, and the hen house has been discarded. They're just foxes running around with the keys to whatever they want, and we the people are unwittingly giving them access to everything. There's no rights to privacy whatsoever. Our constitutional rights are being violated every which way and 50 times on Sunday.
That's my observation.
It's extraordinary. Now I want to talk about a specific incident with Hillary Clinton and her ability. She cut a private deal with Facebook during litigation when she was Secretary of State, which would have precluded her from getting involved in any lawsuits as Secretary of State. She was able to build a template for, that was going to allow her to help win elections. What can you tell us about that little tidbit? Because that's a juicy story, yet another example of Hillary's overreach and abusing her power as Secretary of State, getting involved in lawsuits she had no business being involved in.
Well, this was one of the anomalies that we were investigating in our case. Facebook was acting extremely arrogantly during the run-up to the trial. And nobody should be acting that arrogant unless you know something that nobody else knows. Well, they obviously did, because as we're doing discovery during 2009, well, I have to thank Tom for this information too, because this was only available in Hillary's email servers. But basically in 2009, in September of 2009, Hillary State Department cut a private deal with Facebook for a template for winning elections, 2009. Now, we've also now correlated that was when British Baron Richard Allen became Vice President of Policy for Europe, Africa, and Asia for Facebook. Same in that few months period. And so what we now see is that these international business people were doing the bidding of Facebook and Hillary overseas so they wouldn't break U.S. laws. And so this template was built in India, where Lord the Baron had a lot of influence and control. So basically what we see and can prove is that the head of the State Department, Hillary Clinton, was intervening in our case with Facebook, a witness in our case, and therefore was obstructing justice in our patent infringement trial. And we have hard proof of that.
I got to tell you, every time that lady's name comes up, or that woman's name, I don't even want to refer to her as a lady, her name comes up, it's never with anything good. It's just another example of criminal activity that she's involved in. It's extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it. I want to talk about, just kind of broadly going back, expanding the lens, talking about the control of the narrative and the significance of the media's control. You gave a historical example back in the early 1900s of wireless and the UK's desire to control the narrative for their own purposes, to keep control of their world. And now you look at today's context with the media and their ability to try and control the narrative. At least they've been trying, thanks to social media shows like this, other areas that you go on and speak out. We're breaking those walls down and they're becoming irrelevant. But there's something out there that's still very much in play, and it's software by the name of the company called Avid Software, which is teleprompter software. If you've ever wondered why the media, whether it's Fox News or CNN or anything out there further left or further right saying the same thing, it's because they're using this teleprompter software where information is being presented to them and they just spit it out without even thinking about what they're saying. It's the talking points that are fed the mainstream media. This software also has a backdoor, not so insignificantly, quite importantly, into every Secretary of State office around the country. So every state's SOS has a backdoor where Avid can get in and has access to the actual voter count. So you have an external IP address, right, from Avid Software accessing, which is a non-governmental, accessing a .gov account, and they have control and visibility into the actual voting of the election software.
Right.
Expand on that. I mean, clearly my mind goes in a million directions on what's going on there. What are your thoughts?
Well, our researchers discovered that. It was us that broke that news. And what we discovered is they had another program called Leader Plus. They didn't even bother changing the name of our product. It was basically our vote tool, and this was in 2010. They actually published a brochure, so we have the brochure. And essentially, it was to do exactly what you said, to be able to push streaming text right through the Avid system, right to the teleprompters. And of course, that's probably the election rigging that they were building with that Hillary contract. That's my hunch. I don't know that for a fact, but they do it, and it's now been proven that is in fact how they can control the narrative. Well, that's part of this Tavistock, this mind control psychiatry, and they have many very well researched techniques, and one of them is subconscious conditioning. So if you want an unsuspecting public to think a certain way, and I'm just going to pick something off the top of my head, Trump's a racist. Well, one of the ways you do that is you just keep saying it. Trump's a racist, Trump's a racist, Trump's a racist, Trump's a racist. So finally, when they get triggered, that's all they know how to say in an argument.
That's right.
That's enough to keep them in their particular bucket of votes. So those are, and so the other dangerous thing that's occurring now is with all the combination of the databases that is occurring now in all these data breaches of these hundreds of millions and billions of records. First of all, you got to ask, if somebody's losing that much data, then their network engineers shouldn't be paid, because that's ridiculous that you could lose that much data and not know what's happened. So, but what we know is they've using the storage mechanism that we created. They are now have access to most of the data to be able to profile anybody with about 3,000 different data points. And even if you're not on any of these social networking, all they can do is pick up the keywords from other people talking about you and build the profile very accurately. Well, the danger now is in the next election, they can use that to micro-target individual people, which includes many times their DNA, which they've given up through one of these services. What's that latest?
Ancestry.com or 23andMe.
23andMe is owned by Wellcome Trust out of England, and they're putting all this DNA in your dark profile. So they can be able to profile you and target you down to the individual person level. That's where they're going with this. And once they can do that, unless you're aware of it, you are helpless.
Yeah, unless you're aware of it. And one of the things we failed to mention is that the majority shareholders of Avid Technology, by the way, are Dianne Feinstein, George Soros, Mitt Romney, and then, of course, our good friends over across the pond, Five Eyes notwithstanding, Lord Mark Malloch Brown and Sir Jeffrey Patty and Richard Bloom, which of course is Dianne Feinstein's husband. So if you're wondering why, elections have gone the way they've gone, if you're wondering why the mainstream media spews the same thing over and over again like robots, if you're wondering why people that have opposite opinions of making America great again call people that wear red MAGA hats racist, it's because they have been programmed by what the mainstream media is spewing every single day, and that information is coming from people that are majority shareholders of a company known as Avid Technologies, Dianne Feinstein, at the top, George Soros, Mitt Romney. There you go. It's a sad travesty that this is going on. But the most important thing we can be doing right now, Michael, is talking about it and helping everybody along with the story so people understand the big picture, because I feel like sometimes people just throw their hands in the air and say nothing is ever going to change. Well, you can only affect change if you have knowledge. Knowledge is power. So we're giving people power right now.
I'm a Christian, and there's one of my favorite parables is the parable of the sower. And yes, this is a big problem. It has many faces and aspects to it.
Right.
But I can't fix the whole problem. What am called to do is plant seeds. And if I plant seeds every day and we all do the same thing, then God will give the increase, and these people will see justice.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. Well, I have to say, this has been a very enlightening discussion. I'm sure the audience is thrilled to have this information put in front of them, because not everybody has heard all of this put together in a fashion like this. Where can folks learn more about what you're doing and keep up with? Of course, I'm going to be keeping up with what you're doing because I find this fascinating, but where can folks follow you directly if they want to learn more about about the Miller Act, about, where Leader Technologies is going?
Well, needless to say, I'm not on Facebook, Twitter, or any of the sites.
Why do I find that not surprising?
But there are two groups that are following our case quite closely. One is, it's a long URL. It's Americans4Innovation.blogspot.com. And the other one is aimfortruth.org, which is American Intelligence Media. They've been covering us very faithfully now for several years, and they're starting to see a lot of traction. So those two are the main sites. So if you would put those up, that would be great. So that
they're up on the they'll be up on your description box, your lower third corner on there with your name and everything will be there.
Great. Well, I wanted to mention one other piece of data that we just learned recently. You mentioned the Five Eyes. And I assume your audience knows what the Five Eyes are. Well, but it always puzzled me why our intelligence agency would be sharing intelligence data with Canada and the UK and Australia and New Zealand. Well, now we know. At the end of World War II, the guy who was the chief of staff for the adjutant general for the British war cabinet helped the intelligence world regroup. And one of the things they did in 1996 is they cut a secret deal that was only revealed in 2010, right before our trial, by the way, with Facebook. But anyway, in 1946, they agreed that all of our intelligence communities in the Five Eyes group would share all of their intelligence with each other, and that they would keep the agreement itself secret. So it'd be interesting to know if Bill knew about this agreement, because according to the NSA's website, it wasn't released until 2010. So we haven't known anything about how these people have operated, but they know how they operate, and they have kept ahead of the law by knowing all these insider relationships that have been taking advantage of the entire world.
Something tells me that I don't think finding that information out as to, I think we're going to learn that in the next 10 years. I don't think this is going to be one of those mysteries like the JFK files or anything else that sits out there for 50 years. I think we will learn this fairly quickly, and I even think 10 years might even be a little bit too long of a guesstimate, just because everything that's happening right now, the internet is forever. And, there's fantastic citizen journalism, journalist researchers out there right now that are going to take this information they've heard today, if they've never heard of American Intelligence Media or the other blog spot that has been following you for the last few years. They're going to hear this and they're going to share it and they're going to start digging. I know there's researchers that'll break this down into bite-sized chunks, into long threads, and really start going and finding open source information to support everything you're saying, because it is out there. It is all out there, and it's a matter of just getting the momentum, and that's why that's why this program exists, is to help build the momentum. So I think the momentum is on our side at this point. It's not on the deep state side anymore. It's not on the globalists and those that have had power for so long. Thank you to Moore's Law, which is now has made everything exponentially a lot faster. I think it's going to come crashing down. The things that they invented to control us are now going to be their undoing.
Whoops.
Wow. Well, Michael McKibben, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I really look forward to following this. I'd like to have you back on because I know things will evolve. So as they do, we will bring you back on to bring everybody up to speed.